Hi, welcome to the introductory video for Unit 7 of EDAD 6800, School Leadership. This will be our wrap-up unit of the course here, and I want to use this brief introductory video not so much to introduce new content. There isn't really much in the way of new readings or topics for this week, at least that are assigned for the whole class. But I want to make sure that everybody is clear on expectations for the final paper, which is coming in soon. For the two online dialogue posts, they're going to be due this week. One on your field experience number 4, the culture walk, and one on your sort of draft ideas on the reframing paper, so that we can get some feedback on those prior to your final submission next week. Last week we looked briefly at the 4 frames. Obviously, we didn't give that full detail. There's no way you could in a single week. But I want to make sure that everybody is feeling comfortable not only understanding the 4 frames, but the use of the 4 frames as a leadership and decision-making tool. Notice that the title of their book is not the 4 frames, or is not framing organizations, it's reframing. The emphasis there on the verb or the action of taking a certain perspective that you may view an organization or an organizational problem or challenge with, and then looking at it from a different perspective in order to generate solutions, create empathy with other members of the organizations, and to see it from probably a more accurate perspective. Given that in any single organizations, there's going to be people who tend to, including ourselves, view things from a certain perspective, whether that be cultural or human resource, structural, etc. So this is really about the action of reframing or breaking frame, as Bowman and Deal refer to it, as a leadership tool to cut down on mistakes and increase our broader understanding of the people that we hope to move in some direction. So this week you are posting a brief summary of your culture walk field experiences. You need to have a location to do this, but you're not going to need people, so you just need access to a building. That's going to be mostly it's going to be a walking around field experiences. Look at the symbols that you can see in that building. Architecture is one of the most important types of symbols that we have in schools, as the earlier article we read about the Navajo schools in the Southwest illustrated. So take a look at the various decorations, the architecture, the spacing, the proximity of certain groups of people with other groups of people. And I want you to unpack for us in your short Dialogue 7 response what you learned about the sort of symbolism of your school building and what that says about the school and perhaps things you need to address moving forward. Now, many of us inherit buildings, at least the architecture of which we don't have a great control over. And so I think it's fine to say the architecture promotes or hinders this sorts of behaviors or collaboration, etc. What we do have a lot more control over are the symbols, posters, decorations, signage, these types of things that are a little bit more movable and temporary. So also talk about those things that are less permanent. There's no dialogue in that post, so I simply need to post a 125-word summary of what you did and what you learned there. In Dialogue 7B, you're going to post essentially an outline of your reframing paper. I want you to think of a change story after you've read the outline of the reframing paper that's towards the back of the syllabus. I want you to think of your change situation or your change story. We looked at one in the midterm that was not school-based. It was a neighborhood that was changing. Here I want you to look at a school-based change situation. So in a couple of pages at the outset of that, you're going to give me a summary of what happened, implementation, who was involved, the gap or problem the change was expected to resolve, and then some assessment of that. How did it do? How did it go? Was it rejected? Was it sustained? Was it altered in some way during implementation? Then you're going to use your knowledge of the 4 frames to select the 2 frames that you feel best illuminate some new ideas about this problem and provides leadership guidance on how to move through this problem. So in this week's dialogue in 7B, I just want you to put a couple of key concepts from each frame that seem to tie into your story, and then a sentence or 2 on how they tie in. So for example, if I am using the political frame and my change, I see an aspect of coalitions involved. Some people perhaps for moving to block periods in my high school, for example, and some weren't. I might, in my 7B post, select political frame as a frame. Within the political frame, one of the ideas I'm going to use is coalitions. And I might talk about how teachers who were well accustomed to teaching in a 40 or 50 minute period and had years of lessons and experience and plans all organized around that were somewhat opposed to this shift to 90-minute block periods, let's say, whereas young teachers who were developing lesson plans at the outset anyways, it didn't make as much of a difference if they did a 50-minute period or a 90-minute period because they were creating things from scratch or modifying them tremendously anyways. So that might be the 2 coalitions that formed and influenced this change. Which group has more power? That might depend on the principal, on access to the principal, on what the decision-making structures are in the school. Is there a leadership team who's on that? Does it tend to be the senior folks? I don't know. And so under the political frame, I'd also like to see people select a couple other concepts for your paper, and then I'd choose a second frame. Maybe I want to look at this from a structural frame. What were going to be the problems implementing block periods in this building based on the structures of how our school runs, the school day, busing schedules, sports schedules, electives, graduation requirements, all these other things, and talk about how their structural view presents potential benefits or challenges to your change. And then you're going to give a second set of ideas there. So from my second frame, I'm going to pick a couple of concepts out of there. I want to emphasize that I don't want you just simply to select, I'm going to do the cultural frame and the political frame. I need you to go a little bit deeper than that and understand some of the concepts from those chapters. You're going to have to read them in detail, obviously more than what we had last week, to understand all these concepts and even be exposed to them for the first time in some cases. You will then, after you discuss the 2 frames and what that shows you, you're going to have a short 2-page conclusion about this process of reframing and what you learned by forcing yourself to look at the same problem from 2 different lenses that are provided by Bowman and Deal. This week you're going to give the outline, which is the 2 frames, a quick summary of the change story and the concepts from each frame and how they fit in. This can be an outline formatted. I don't need full paragraphs. When that paper comes in, is the date listed on the syllabus? That'll be full fleshed out, and we're typically looking at a 7-page paper when it comes in. You'll have some references, but you don't need to do outside research. You'd probably just be referencing Bowman and Deal and some text that discuss their work. So that's the reframing paper. We also need to look at our end of course field experience submissions. Those of you in principal certification programs, that's the MED or the All-Cert, you need to log your field experiences in your live text portfolio. There's directions on how to do that in the end of course documents folder at the bottom of our Moodle site. Those of you who are not in a certification program for school leadership simply need to log all 15 hours in the template that's located there in the end of course documents folder and submit that to me by the date listed on the syllabus. The hours have a certain percentage of your course grade attached to them. So you have 5 that were done as part of our required field experiences. You have another 10 that should be completed by next week that are self-selected, which you can do at your school site or a different school site. That's fine. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me via email. Otherwise, I look forward to reading your outlines of your framing papers and then getting those back next week for our final assignment. Thanks all, and see you online.